Here's the thing, Dr. Paul. You do all that, and you can have the constitutional argument. That's fine. We constantly hear about how we as a nation are falling behind with other developed countries in terms of education. Maybe it's the bully pulpit as a president, but what could we do to improve education in the country?
Well, I think getting rid of the federal government would improve it. You know, I think the quality of education has gone way down because it diminishes. Well, they spend too much time getting young people to pass tests and holding the other people back. No, I think there's no doubt that the quality of education has gone down. I bet if you drew two lines, quality this way, the role of the federal government this way. So if you get rid of that, I think the quality of education is going to go up. There's still, you know, some decent education in this country, but it's a smaller number of people. It's designed, you know, only to protect a very small number of people. And there's, you know, even in medicine, as bad as our medicine is, there's some parts of medicine in this country is still the very, very best. So it isn't like everything is bad. But I think if you want higher quality education, it should be done privately would be better, or locally. You know, I was raised in a system where I went to public schools, but they were controlled by our school board, you know, in one little town, and that was it. And we had, you know, we ended up getting half-decent education. So
in terms of these meta issues, like the fact that China produces so many more engineers than we do in the country, is there something you could do as a president in terms of maybe not policies, maybe not money, but what could we do to make us more competitive?
I think it's related somewhat to the work ethic, which we have forgotten about. I think everything can't be blamed on the Department of Education and the system as much as I don't think we have as much respect for the work ethic, because, you know, many individuals, especially coming from the Orient, boy, they come over and they work and study, and we've become softies. You know, we're not quite the disciplinarians with our children that we should as a whole. But the people who are sick and tired of it are changing that because they're opting out. And thank goodness they still have the right to opt out and have homeschooling and private schooling. And believe me, as I travel and visit with people who have been raised in homeschooling or a private Christian school, I mean, their quality of education is pretty amazing. So I think that's what it needs. So it's a personal responsibility as well as the system that discourages it.
Speaking of the way you raise your kids, you have a question from Jared in Manchester.
Okay. I met your son Randy a couple months ago, and I was wondering if you ever considered him running as your vice president.
I hadn't thought about it. People might think that's what do they call it? You know, I think that'd be a little bit too much of a mixture. But legally, it would be illegal. We're in two different states. It might, yeah, but we haven't had that discussion yet.
What would you look for in a vice president?
I'd want to have somebody agree with me on the issues. I certainly don't want somebody resigning because, you're bringing those troops home from Korea today? And then he resigns. Now, he would agree with me on the position, which means that he takes the Constitution seriously. That would be the qualification.
Thank you. Dr. Paul, we hear Republican candidates all the time invoking the name Ronald Reagan. What grade would you give his presidency?
Boy, that's an interesting and a trick question, too. Ronald Reagan is the president that I knew the best. I have more pictures with him. I flew on Air Force One in his helicopter together. He was a gold standard guy. But you want me to give him a grade? I don't give him an A. I give him a B. I give him an A+ for being a grand person because I really liked him. We got along together. But he raised taxes, deficits exploded. He did a few things in foreign policy that I didn't approve of. But the thing that I admired him most for is what he wrote in his autobiography after he was out of office. Many of you might remember about the Marines, 241 Marines being killed in Beirut. It was a real tragedy. I recall it because that was when I was in Congress the first time, and there were several of us saying, "Why are you doing that? Bring these troops home, get them out of there." And then the explosion came. They didn't like us there. We were in their face, so they blew them up. And Ronald Reagan at the time said, before he went in, he said, "I'll never turn tail and run." But as soon as they got killed, he turned tail and ran. And he admitted that in his biography and said, I said this, I wouldn't run. But he says, he wrote and said that he never realized how complicated and confusing the politics of that region was. And he says, if anybody would have only known this before that, those 241 Marines shouldn't have died. Now that is a very brave statement. So I give him tremendous credit for that. A man of character, he lowered tax rates, all this stuff is very good. But I would have liked I would like to not have seen the deficit explode. That was our first big increase, and of course we raised taxes during that time too.
Sure. Let me ask you another question. Being president is not just a life-changing experience, obviously, but it's a pretty intense kind of job. Everyone's got an opinion. Most people critical of you. What would be more important to you, influencing the next president or actually being president? What's better?
Well, so far I haven't been offered the choice because I'm running, because I'm running for the presidency, and I would say winning, and then second choice is influencing the presidency, and that's very important too. And I think ideas actually drive events. Politicians reflect attitudes, so I think convincing people and getting them to understand why these issues are important. I see that my role as a candidate, as a president, as a congressman, always to persuade people to understand why it's in our interest not to be overseas, to why it's in our interest to have a gold standard, why it's in our interest to live within our means. And I think that is probably the most important, because the government reflects the people. And people have to support a president. So if I'm isolated, if I win and we don't get new members in Congress and people don't say, if I win, that means a lot of people said, he's right, this is what we ought to do, then you have support from the people. But just to put one person there, it's not going to work. And we're in a transition right now because the people spoke last time. We have new people there, and it's still very frustrating because we don't have quite enough, and there's an attempt to change it, and somebody attempts to cut a little bit here, and they get lambasted for throwing everybody out in the street. And so we're in tough times because of this, and people have to understand what the government's doing because we don't have a dictatorship.
I think over the course of this past hour, viewers at home, and I'm sure our audience, have a pretty good sense of where you're coming from in terms of your philosophy. Being president is also an executive job in charge of 2 million federal employees. What have you shown in your past that shows that you could be a good executive?
Well, before I answer that, I would like to make sure I don't have to manage 2 million people. I want to manage a lot less people. Well, I imagine I've had as much experience as any of the other ones. I mean, I've had many small businesses at home when I was practicing medicine. Medicine is a business. I have been, quite a few employees, and I've managed congressional offices, and I've been in educational foundations and in many organizations. So it's a bit, but I think, ideology is very important too. But I think it's a record where I have been very much involved and can convince people what they ought to do. People have to convince it's in their best interest, and then I think the job actually becomes easier. Actually, the ideal job for a president, if I could get there, which is not likely because we have to change so much, actually I should take a pay cut, because I don't want to do all these things, because I think a president should not run your life, so I'll get that off the table. I don't think we should run the world and tell everybody else how to live, and I don't think we should run the economy. We're supposed to preserve your liberty so you, as people, can take care of yourselves, and that shouldn't be that tough a job. So if we had that type of president, we should have the Congress meeting about 2 months out of the year, and we should be repealing laws, and we should cut all their pay, including the president.
And to that point, what is more important for you personally, if you have to choose, cutting the nation's debt or lowering taxes?
I I think you have to do them both. If you want me to say which is more important, I would think lowering taxes. But I would pick another one. Offer me cut spending, because spending is a tax. It's when the government spend, they either have to tax you, borrow the money, or print the money. And that is the tax, and that is the debt. So you've got to get back to the spending, and spending is a consequence of the people expecting cradle-to-grave care, as well as responsibility around the world to police the world and get involved in all those entangling alliances.
A few seconds left. I don't want to get you in trouble back at home, but live free or die is pretty much your favorite state motto, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I wondered how my motto got on your license plate. How did it get there?
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us here on the web. A reminder, you can watch the first 30 minutes of this conversation by clicking onto our politics section. As we continue this series, we'll archive every program. You can watch it now or even closer to Election Day. The WMUR.com politics section is also the place to go. If you have questions for the candidate, just click on the Submit a Question link and send them in. We'll take the best ones and ask them during our program. A special thank you today to Ron Paul for coming in. And of course, a big thanks to our audience who asked such great questions, and for them coming here to hear from the candidate. And thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Great job. That was really fun.
WMUR News 9 is online 24/7 at WMUR.com.